once they were some of the most advanced structures and facilities on the planet. At the cutting edge of engineering design and construction. Today, they stand abandoned, contaminated, and sometimes deadly. Their empty buildings and infrastructures are full of the echoes of real people and vanished lives, leaving many questions unanswered and mysteries unsolved. In this episode, we explore the world's strangest abandoned engineering projects that created empty, silent cities. We ask, why has a ruined Cold War airbase become a no-go area?
Gällivare is an underground airbase shrouded in secrecy.
It's one of those sites that must have looked really good on paper. Let's create a hidden airbase inside of a mountain. Nobody will see it.
That was designed to be protected against a nuclear weapon that was used at Hiroshima.
How did a tiny Japanese mining island become the most overcrowded place on the planet?
It's one of the most claustrophobic places on Earth. Over 5,000 people lived in a really tiny community.
The fact that they could increase the size of the island really quite easily because you've got the materials that you need coming up from the ground.
You're talking about digging a 200-meter deep mine in the sea next to this tiny little island. That is an incredible engineering achievement.
Did the street layout of the Soviet Union's model city become a matter of life or death for its population?
The abandoned city of Pripyat is a modern-day Pompeii. Overnight, life changed very quickly, and it was very bad.
It's linked intrinsically with the nuclear disaster Chernobyl. But I think you have to look at it as how it was intended. And at the time, that was the Soviet dream, and people wanted to be part of it.
And how did Nazi Germany create a huge mind control facility at a holiday resort?
Prora was the last element, the ideological missing piece that would ensure that everybody thinks the same. It was mind control at its finest.
One of history's most sinister and overlooked abandoned communities stands in northern Germany, on the Baltic island of Rügen. Hidden behind the pine trees lining the coast is a giant building, a forgotten relic of Hitler's Nazi regime. One of the longest buildings ever constructed in Europe, its massive bulk dominates the peaceful scenery. Its name is Prora, and it was built to be a holiday camp for thousands of Germans. But how did this colossal structure come to be here? And what was its real, sinister purpose?
The Prora holiday camp is nothing but a modern-day mind control center. This is where German workers would go for an alleged holiday. But guess what? You're being woken up with a loudspeaker and told what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. You're gonna have your meals together. And in your so-called leisure time, you're gonna watch the same propaganda films and read the same propaganda literature.
The amount of time and money that went into creating the Prora complex, you realize what an actually vitally important project it was for the Nazis. This was really the long-term game, which was to create a master race that thought like the Nazis thought.
Katja Luca is a local historian who's an expert on the site. She's discovered that although Prora was said to be just a holiday complex for industrial workers, its true role in Hitler's Germany was far darker.
Man sollte hier manipuliert und beeinflusst werden entsprechend der Nazi-Ideologie. Die Idee hatten, dann ein Seebad zu errichten, was dazu beitragen sollte, deutschen Arbeitern, die nicht so viel Geld haben, auch Ferien zu haben und auch am Meer Ferien machen zu können. Der Hintergedanke dabei war, dass man möglichst schnell sich erholen sollte, in möglichst kurzer Zeit, in hochkonzentrierter Form, um fit für den Krieg zu sein, um bessere Arbeitsleistung durchführen zu können und eigentlich auch, um fit für Massenmord gemacht zu werden.
But how could an ordinary holiday camp play a part in Hitler's plans for world domination and genocide? The whole Prora concept started with an organization called Kraft durch Freude, or Strength Through Joy. Led by top Nazi Robert Ley, on the surface, Strength Through Joy just provided subsidized holidays for millions of low-paid German industrial workers. But its real mission was to unite them behind Hitler.
I think the Strength Through Joy organization had a very serious intention behind it, and that was to bind people to the Nazi regime. And probably even more than that, there was an attempt to brainwash people and prepare them for the possibility of war.
Propaganda was totally essential to the success of the Third Reich. They had to have everyone on board. So what Prora was an ideological way of making people feel really happy about giving 100% of their free time being indoctrinated with, aren't we the greatest? Isn't it worth the suffer? Shouldn't we all be in this together?
With Prora, Ley planned to go even further than the organized activities and sea cruises Strength Through Joy had provided up to now. The giant complex would offer everything workers needed to enjoy their break from turning out weapons for the Third Reich. Swimming pools, a cinema, bowling alleys, cafes, and cabarets. But their activities would be rigidly controlled to a background of relentless propaganda.
The concept was way ahead of its time in terms of what they were intending to produce. Yes, it was quite Spartan, but at the same time, you had this amazing complex that, of course, had an element of control planned or built into it. But for the average German worker, this would have seemed like nirvana. They would have come from industrial cities. They probably had never seen the sea before. So you can understand its attraction.
You have to imagine the whole intent was to make the holidaymakers step off that boat and say, wow, this is fantastic. There must have been a great deal of nationalism.
Die in Stein gehauene Ideologie der Nationalsozialisten. Wir sehen hier die steinerne Vorstellung von Volksgemeinschaft, wie die Nationalsozialisten sie sich gedacht haben. Ähnlich wie auf den KdF-Schiffen hätte man eigentlich von morgens bis abends Programm gehabt. Mit einem Morgenappell und dann bis hin zum Schwimmen im Meer und Abendessen und Abschlussveranstaltung wäre alles durchorganisiert gewesen.
The 2.8-mile-long building was divided into 8 six-story accommodation blocks, all constructed from reinforced concrete, a huge innovation at the time.
It would have been something that you'd never have seen before. And so with that comes that impression of, wow, this is cutting-edge technology. This is advancement. We're at the forefront here. So it might sound quite dull to us today, reinforced concrete. Back then, it was really exciting.
Each block was to contain dozens of rooms overlooking the sea, all designed to be deliberately basic. Prora wasn't about luxury, it was about power. Its huge entrance halls were designed to have the same impact as the vast Nuremberg rally arena.
Dieser Raum gehört einfach mit zum Das ist so hoch und so mächtig, um natürlich den Arbeiter, der hier hätte herkommen sollen, zu beeindrucken, einzuschüchtern. Auf diese Weise hat man Einfluss genommen. Man war eingeschüchtert und man war aber zugleich auch erhoben, wenn man Bestandteil dieser großen Idee war. So hat Manipulation funktioniert.
You look at Prora today, and it's sort of desolate. It doesn't have the grandeur that it was intended to have, and probably once did. If you look at some of the original designs, this has this great Aryan feel to it. You can imagine coming off the boat and saying, wow, what a great country is this?
I don't think you could see a structure back then in the 1930s like what there is at Prora and not be impressed by it, not feel as though, wow, this is something special and it's ours.
The key part of the Prora complex was going to be a monumental auditorium, capable of holding all 20,000 tourists at the same time.
It's austere. It is everything that is grand about the so-called Aryan race, and it was designed to emit feelings of national pride, and you have to believe it had that very effect.
Creating giant auditoriums is something we've been doing for a really long time. So the Romans did it particularly well, where they had tens of thousands of people all in quite a small area.
I think maybe you would be almost hypnotized by the sight that you've got in front of you. And maybe, yeah, the psychological effect of that worked to Hitler's hand.
So nicht funktioniert, wie man sich ihn gedacht hatte, als man ihn errichtet hat. Aber man sieht, wofür er gedacht war. Man kann damit viel erklären. Man kann die Ideologie damit erklären.
At the end of the war, Prora was taken over by the invading Russian forces, who turned it into a military prison for those who opposed the communist regime. When the Berlin Wall fell in the 1990s, Prora was abandoned, until recently, when renovation was started on the site to create high-end sea view apartments.
Many believe the whole complex should have been leveled. Let's forget about this mind control program. It's a part of our dark past. Let's keep it there. But the fact that it's now being renovated into luxury homes is in a way symbolic of the fact that capitalism has won. Ironically, this is a celebration of what we see in those happy couple posters, but for a whole different reason.
Reinforced concrete, a new innovation at Prora, also helped build a home for an entire community, which lies off the southwest coast of Japan, near the port of Nagasaki. It's a small island called Hashima. 140 years ago, it was just a narrow ridge sticking out of the sea. But as coal was discovered at the end of the 19th century, the island slowly grew in size through land reclamation to accommodate the huge numbers of miners and support structures. So how did it become the most crowded city in the world? And why was it eventually abandoned?
Reclaiming land is actually a massive engineering challenge because you're working with water which moves. The levels come up and down. It can be quite acidic, quite salty. It corrodes man-made materials quite easily. And then what you're trying to do is bring stacks of new material and pile it up within this movable medium and create a solid, stable structure that you can then live and work in and build huge buildings on.
Hashima was not called the island without green for no good reason. It's one of the most claustrophobic places on Earth. Over 5,000 people lived in a really tiny community. But the funny thing is they got used to it. And when they went onto the mainland, they felt uncomfortable. But tourists go there today, and they tell me they can't wait to leave.
Hashima is known locally as Gunkanjima, or Battleship Island. Tomoji Kabata is a former coal miner who worked on the island until it closed down in 1974. He has very clear memories of first going there.
そうですね。もう最初船から見た時はもう本当にまさしくね、軍艦の姿をしてるなという印象はね、もうはっきり受けましたね。だから島の全体的な雰囲気は分からなかったんですけれども、事務所の中から事務所の窓から眺めてね、っていうのはもう石炭の山は見えるし、労働者もたくさん行き交いしますのでね、まさしく炭鉱の島だなっていう印象はね、受けましたね。
There was a rich coal vein lying beneath Hashima that was discovered, and engineers sank a 200-meter shaft to reach it. Working conditions in a mine so far under the sea were often unbearable.
もう地下はね、本当にもう危険ですね。もうしょっちゅうね、石はね、天井から石ころが落ちてくるんですけれどもね、もう蒸し風呂の中でね、もう重労働をするようなものなんですよ。
As the island produced more and more coal, an increasing number of workers were needed to remove it from deep underground, and space was at a premium. It was a huge logistical challenge.
I think Hashima is an incredible engineering achievement. You're talking about digging a 200-meter deep mine in the sea next to this tiny little island. And you need to think about, well, fine, I've got this mine, I've got all this material coming up, but where am I going to send it? Where am I going to store it? There's no space to actually, position it. So you have to think about conveying it out. How far can the ships actually come to the island? How are you going to get the material from the island to the ship, and then the ship can sort of disseminate it back to the country? It's an incredible logistical challenge, and I think something that they seem to have done really, really well.
What really strikes me about the island Hashima is that it's almost this self-propagating entity. The deeper you go into the mine, the more material you're bringing up. And to use that to backfill and make your island slightly bigger to maybe then house more miners so you can go even deeper. It kind of keeps going round and round. Where does it stop?
Over the years, as the workforce grew massively, the sea wall was extended to increase the size of the island and protect it from storms.
It seems like reinforced concrete was almost designed for something like building on the small island at Hashima. Don't have much space to move around and to bring in and have lots of stores of materials that you're going to build. So reinforced concrete's great for that. You pour it where you want it, job done once it's set.
やはりね、びっくりしたのはもう鉄筋コンクリートの高層の建物がね、たくさんあったことですね。もう予備地しかなかったものですからね、まさにこんなにね、高層アパートがもうたくさん建っているとはね、もう夢にも思いませんでしたね。
Bringing big buildings close to somewhere like a mine is very challenging as an engineer, because you've got a lot of stuff going on underground, which is all hidden away, but it's very much there. You're taking soil away from where your foundations might be, you're taking materials away. So in a way, you're weakening the ground and then trying to build big structures on top. So that's the challenge in making sure your foundations are really strong and stable.
The other advantage of using it, Hashima, is that it's pretty much fireproof. I mean, you can't set fire to reinforce concrete. And when you're dealing with a coal mine, it's probably the material you'd want best.
In the 1960s and early 70s, production was at its highest. At its peak, there were 5,000 miners on the island producing nearly 500,000 tons of coal a year. It was crowded, noisy, and polluted. Minoru Kinoshita was born on Hashima and remembers the extreme conditions well.
もう人がたくさんいました。でも本当にこんなに人がいるのかって思われるぐらいたくさんいましたけど、ごちゃごちゃしたっていう感じはなかったですけど。30号棟で住んでたんですけど、6畳一間で4人家族で、もう非常に、狭い思いをしましたし、私たちの寝床は押し入れです。ですから父親がお布団を出すと、私たちはその押し入れで寝ていたという状態ですね。
Despite the challenging conditions, the people living on Hashima not only survived, but learned to adapt to their unique situation.
保育所、小学校、中学校、パチンコ屋からスナック、旅館、床屋さん、パンマ屋さん。そうですね、ここの高層アパート、もうエレベーターは一機もないんですね。そのためアパートを水平に移動できるように、あちらこちらと空中廊下のようなものがね、もうずっと設置されておったんです。でそのためね、下に降りなくてもアパートをこう水平に移動できるようにね、そういう工夫がね、されていましたね。
Maybe there is an element at Hashima that the kind of human factor and well-being of everybody, and just having some space to not be crowded and not feel so imposed upon. Just not sure that was ever considered. All they wanted to do was make it functional. Hashima was there to be functional, and outside of being efficient at work, I'm not sure much more was thought about.
Despite the almost inhumane conditions on the island, it was the children who consistently found a way round the problems.
子供さんたちは本当にね、いろいろな知恵を使いましたね。もう階段を使ってね、面こしたり、ちょっとした広場ではね、ビー玉をしたり、子供さんたちの遊び場所はね、もうこのアパートの屋上でした。
野球をやったり、それもゴロ野球っていう自分たちで考え出した野球をやってました。こういうふうな感じでもうみんなね、いろんな遊びを自分たちで考えながらこの島では遊びをやってました。
Its population had grown to over 5,500 people, crammed into less than half of the 40-acre island, making it the most densely populated area on the planet. The mining operation on Hashima was eventually closed in 1974. In its 84-year history, the Hashima mine had produced an incredible 16.5 million tons of coal, but eventually its deposits were exhausted. When the island's heart stopped, its community died too, and Hashima was left to the mercy of the elements. The city of Pripyat, the pride of the former Soviet Union, has also been abandoned to the elements. But why was its new design so important when things went spectacularly wrong? Pripyat was designed to provide state-of-the-art housing and living facilities for the neighboring Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Now, it stands derelict in the Ukraine's vast pine forests. Patrolled by armed guards and protected by security barriers. A warning of how quickly dreams can become nightmares.
The abandoned city of Pripyat is a modern-day Pompeii. It's as if overnight, or at least even within hours, life changed. You see a huge wheel where the local community would have recreational moments. You see children's toys. You realize that whatever happened here happened very quickly, and it was very bad.
In April 1986, a reactor explosion at Chernobyl nuclear power plant released a plume of radioactive debris into the atmosphere. A huge area covering the Ukraine and neighboring Belarus and Russia was contaminated. And radiation levels increased dramatically across Europe.
The irony is that the whole place has now become a very popular tourist attraction. Why? I think it's that morbid fascination. We've been watching too many B movies for decades now. You want to see in the real world what could happen on a larger scale if we get it wrong big time.
Pripyat was just 3 kilometers from the Chernobyl plant and its deadly radioactive cloud. At the time of the disaster, it was home to nearly 50,000 people.
It's very easy for us now to look at Pripyat and think of it as a disaster town. It's linked intrinsically with the nuclear disaster just down the road at Chernobyl. But I think you have to look at it as how it was intended and how life was before disaster struck. The iconic images that we can picture about Pripyat, the Ferris wheel that's kind of stuck there and decaying, the gas masks lying around, that tells one story in this, just looking at decay. At the time when it was operational and it was functional, that was the Soviet dream and people wanted to be part of it.
When it was founded in 1970 to house workers for the new Chernobyl plant, Pripyat was intended to be a showcase for the whole Soviet Union. It would highlight the peaceful use of nuclear energy and be a model for town planning. Tour guide Sergei Chernov first saw Pripyat as a young man and had no doubt it was the town of the future.
Місто Прип'ять і на момент аварії ще до кінця не була добудована. А це ж було 82 рік, це було 4 роки до аварії. Це місто, можливо, єдине в житті, де я бачив стільки багато троянд, стільки багато дітей.
The city's planners had almost unlimited space for their new town, and they took advantage of it. The apartment blocks were separated by parks and gardens, and as most of the city's population would be under 30, there were plenty of sports facilities. The heart of Pripyat was its main square.
Це, наприклад, перед нами колишній будинок культури звався «Енергетик». Назва до сих пір збереглася. Справа, бачите, теж назва збереглася – «Готель Полісся». Гарний. Навіть на той час був це суперсучасний. На той час суперсучасний готель. Будинок, як ви бачите, п'ятиповерховий, там лозунг «Хай буде атом робітником, а не солдатом». А бачите, як атом себе повів.
The new model town was hailed as a triumph for socialism, and soon the reason for its existence was ready. The first reactor at the Chernobyl plant was completed in 1977, and by 1983, all 4 were online. Then, at 1:23 a.m. on the 26th of April 1986, Pripyat's bright future was shattered.
Reactor number 4 exploded, spewing radiation over much of Europe. 2 others have been permanently shut down. It is the world's worst nuclear accident.
The explosion at Chernobyl's reactor number 4 threw out huge quantities of radioactive material. But no warning was given to the people of Pripyat. Within hours, many started falling ill. Another day went by before the authorities ordered the city to be evacuated. Hundreds of buses and trucks arrived to pick up Pripyat's inhabitants. They were told they would only be leaving for a few days.
The layout at Pripyat, with its enormous, wide avenues and big open spaces, in my mind, certainly helped the efficiency of the evacuation that took place over 48 hours. Getting the entire population, almost 50,000 people, away from that town. If you tried to do that in any kind of conglomeration that had grown organically with little streets and back roads all over the place, that would have been a lot more difficult. It would have been one heck of a challenge. Having structure and being able to, I guess, break it all down and plan that evacuation, and then having the arteries to get people away, just made that whole evacuation work really quite efficiently.
Within 48 hours, 53,000 people from Pripyat and the surrounding area were evacuated. A 1,000 square mile exclusion zone was set up to keep people away from the contaminated area. Pripyat's destruction by the atomic power that gave it life was a tragic irony. 300 miles south is another Cold War community that could easily have withstood radioactive fallout, but proved fatally vulnerable to the bitter hatreds of civil war. In 1958, people living in northwest Yugoslavia realized that intensive construction work was taking place in the area. Secrecy was so tight, the locals had no idea that one of the largest and most expensive construction projects in Europe was taking place right in their backyard. Jeleva Underground Air Base.
Jeleva is one of those sites that must have looked really good on paper. Let's create a hidden air base inside of a mountain. Nobody will see it.
It was not actually that unusual. There were other places in Europe, notably Switzerland and even Italy, that had similar types of projects. Having said that, during the Cold War, the Russians and the United States, on the whole, were using hardened aircraft shelters that would not only protect their planes, they thought, but would also protect their tactical nuclear weapons.
Urban explorer Goran Les is an expert on abandoned military bases and has carried out an extensive survey on the Jeleva base.
During the Cold War, the main purpose of this airport and this air base was to repel the initial attack from the Soviets or from the Western side. That's why it was built in this remote location. It was protected by this mountain from the south side and by the large plateau that has good visibility from the north side.
The concept of burying your Air Force underground seems like a pretty good idea. But at Željava, this took 20 years for them to build, effectively what's just 3 kilometers worth of tunnel into the mountainside.
Željava was designed to be the cornerstone of Yugoslavia's air defenses. 5 7,000 feet runways were constructed to allow the base to operate 3 fighter squadrons. But the real problems began when the engineers started tunneling into the mountain.
When they were building the tunnels at Željava, to their surprise, they came across natural caverns and caves in the rock. It wasn't a solid mountain, as I think they expected it to be. So they were presented with a challenge. How do you continue your tunnel through air? And they had to then rethink the design at those points, suspend the tunnel in the air through these caverns and natural caves, rather than building it through the rock.
So engineers were kind of learning as they went along. And I think that's why they used reinforced concrete to strengthen the mountain up, to create these huge spaces that they needed in order to put all their planes in.
Hangars for 80 aircraft were carved out of the solid rock, as well as command and control facilities, generators, bomb and fuel stores, and living space for 1,000 people. Special features were also installed to limit the effects of a nuclear explosion.
This whole entrance is a blast chamber that is curving 90 degrees onto the side. In case of a nuclear blast, the blast gets dissipated inside this chamber before it enters the main tunnel. On the roof, you can see those concrete diaphragms that were designed to deflect the blast. The real door is located on the end of this curving tunnel. It's a massive 100-ton reinforced concrete movable door.
Protecting your Air Force underground keeps it away from any attack or blast that's going to affect them directly. But by burying it all underground, yes, you've got the protection of a great big mountain on top of you, but should there be an enormous blast around any of the apertures that allow you to get access in and out, it's almost like the tunnels are propagating and channeling that blast towards the very thing you're trying to protect.
Željava could remain sealed off from the world for a month and still keep operating from its 5 runways. The whole base was designed to withstand the impact of a 20-kiloton nuclear weapon. The same destructive power as the bomb which destroyed the city of Nagasaki.
The aircraft were stored behind those pressure doors. They were all lined up one behind the other. When a particular aircraft was going to go flying, they towed this aircraft onto the beginning of the runway and took off from there. This shape was purposely built to accommodate a MiG-21 aircraft because it had single vertical stabilizer, so it could just pass underneath this concrete shield.
Would these tunnels with the sliding concrete defenses have actually prevented a nuclear explosion from forcing this massive explosion back into the mountain? We'll never know because it wasn't actually attacked, but what we do know is that it was designed to be protected against the sort of nuclear weapon that was used at Hiroshima, and of course they became much, much more powerful.
You have to think about the whole logistics of the operation. 1,000 people could live in this mountain for a month. But if you're gonna come out, what if everything has been nuked and you survive? Great, so what? Who are you gonna launch a plane against? There's no one to attack. It's all gone.
All this didn't come cheap. The construction of Željava cost $6 billion, making it one of the most expensive construction projects carried out in post-war Europe. But despite the vast commitment of time and money that made Željava the largest underground airbase in Yugoslavia and one of the largest in Europe, it was all for nothing. When Yugoslavia broke up in 1991, the rival forces fought for control of the airbase.
when Bosnian forces were about to take over this whole area, they laid mines all over the airport so that other forces cannot retake it. The Serbs detonated huge sums of explosives buried inside runways and inside those tunnels. The base was completely destroyed after serving only about 1 year of actual combat.
When you consider the enormous cost and the fact that it's only actually used in an operational sense against the Yugoslav people during the civil wars of the early 1990s, I think you come to the conclusion that this is a huge white elephant among military projects.
With its tunnels wrecked and its runways mined, Jellova was abandoned. Today, only a few people are ready to risk entering the highly contaminated tunnels of this once impressive base.
Jellova could be regarded as a Cold War paranoia era. It was shrouded in so much secrecy all those decades ago. It could not be considered a tourist destination because you need much preparation. You need to approach this with utter caution or you really could lose your life.
Sites like the giant Prora building, tiny concrete-covered Hashima, the overgrown streets of Pripyat, and Jellova's network of tunnels are proof of how engineers have overcome incredible challenges to make life possible in extraordinary places.
The whole notion of an abandoned community, a ghost town, leaves us with this feeling of, what went wrong here? What happened that was so bad that it's now desolate? Could that happen again? It gives you a feeling of what life would be like in a post-apocalyptic world.
Now, some of these abandoned ghost towns are taking on a new lease of life.
I always imagined there to be these kind of futuristic air bridges joining buildings up, and it's fascinating for me that Hashima did this decades ago.
Is it a glimpse into the past or our future? The population is growing exponentially, so it's a view as to who and how we may live and become, but also how we might perish.
In Pripyat, guided tours allow visitors a brief glimpse of a Soviet city frozen in time, with the added thrill of a radiation check when the tour is over.
It's not about the voyeurism. It's not about going there and saying, ooh, this is where people lived, they're not there now. It's about why did this really happen? Because no one believes what they're told by the media, so the conspiracy theories just run rife. And that's what fuels people's imagination.
It would surprise me if the successes of what happened at Pripyat when disaster struck, how quickly they managed to evacuate the entire city, wasn't used as best case analysis for future disasters.
But it's Prora, the giant Nazi holiday complex, which is really becoming a success story. For many years, people wanted it torn down. Now one block has already been converted into luxury holiday apartments. Another will soon boast a 5-star hotel.
Wunderschöne Natur, die man hier haben kann, und das sitzt hier mittendrin und stört enorm. Natürlich könnte man darüber nachdenken, ob man sowas abreißt, aber natürlich kann man es nicht abreißen, weil es so ein wichtiger historischer Ort ist.
As an engineer, it's actually quite nice to give new purpose to an old building, especially if it's been used for something a little bit checkered in the past, putting that awful history behind us and actually looking forward to new purposes, new things, and that definitely gives you a feeling of satisfaction.
After so many years of gloom and decay, this abandoned site is finally becoming the holiday destination it was always intended to be.